What's good with the YouTube? A convict's perspective. It's your boy Big Flacco sliding through with my co-host, Big Senor Rojo. And as always, you already know, coming through a little bit of that energy. And on today's content, man, we found an interesting article by someone I personally know. He has his own YouTube channel called Cops, Gangs, and Politicians. On YouTube. He's an author of several books, The History of Nuestra Familia, The History of the Mexican Mafia, The History of the Aryan Brotherhood, our very well-known author and known as Gabe Morales. And so we found this article, man, and there's some very interesting components that explains a lot of the NF history that we're going to break down. We're going to give our perspective of it, add a little things that may be missing. But for my most part, in researching all of Gabe's work and knowing what he does a good job, man. His information is pretty damn accurate, man. I've talked to several people, like an old school familianos, like I'm not going to say their name, but they've all said that his books are pretty much on time. So with that said, you know what I'm saying? Rojo is going to break down this article and read it for us.
All right, man. This is titled The Real History of the NF. And this is going to, explain like a lot of things that we've said before and a lot of things that have been said on other channels about how initially, man, there wasn't no North and South. Geography had no bearing whatsoever on allegiances or factions or anything of that nature, man. But this will break it down a little bit, man, and tell you some of the starts, especially as far as the...
And Rojo, before you start, when you get to the individual lips that's discussed in this chapter, there's one omission that he's cleared up in his book later on, and that is, it's not John Lips Valdez, it's Little John Valdez, who was from Little Valley, who was the first padre of the Nuestra Familia when they had the Padrino system back then. So that's just a minor correction.
Right. All right, man, here we go. By late 1965 through 1967, the California Mexican Mafia, or MA, controlled many prison yards in the California Department of Corrections, and had already started to victimize Northern California inmates as well as inmates from Southern California who would not join their gang. Some MA members were against Mexicans victimizing Mexicans, especially some members from Maravilla, which was a large area in East Los Angeles. The first Nuestra Familia Mexicana Constitution was written between the lines of legal work. The draft was covertly smuggled out to others who voiced concerns about La MA's tactics. Voted to the first mesa, or board of the organization, was Little John from San Gabriel Valley's Big Bassett gang. Is that accurate? Big Bassett, is that right?
No, I think it's from Little Valley.
I agree.
Little John. It's Little John from Valdez. There was also a Juan Lips Valdez, also known as John Valdez.
Gotcha.
So throughout the historical research, he always thought that there was two people that were the same person, but it's actually two different people.
Hey, that just dawned on me right now too. I understand how that could be easily confused. Okay, here we go. From Bakersfield, and MA leader Shai Cadena's cousin. Weddle from the West LA's Clanton gang, Freddie Gonzalez from Los Angeles Temple Street, and San Diego Diarra from Pacoima in the San Fernando Valley, as well as Black Jess from Oxnard, Chiques. Note, all of these initial NFM leaders were from Southern California. There was no North and South yet. It was strictly NFM or MA, and that was it. The objectives of the NFM group, according to their constitution, were social, political, economical, and cultural. The NFM did have an alliance with the Black family, which later was named the Black Guerrilla family, against the Mexican Mafia Aryan Brotherhood alliance. By 1967, many NFM members were being sent to San Quentin. This is about the time period of growing dissatisfaction with the MA and growing numbers of NFM. Black Bob Vasquez, who was later an NF general, states he was introduced to the group, and Babo Sosa was later elected as the sole Nuestro general, but neither started the NF. There have been some historical misunderstandings about La Familia Cinco, which was a separate group from the NF ran by an inmate named David Corona. Familia Cinco was active until the mid-1970s as documented. The NFM, blooming flower, was spreading forth in CDC at a time when the Mexican mafia was dominant in controlling the Mexican-American inmate population, and soon led up to confrontations around September 16, 1968, which is Mexican independence, and on December 17th of 72, which resulted in the death of Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena at Chino Prison, Palm Hall. This killing, depicted in the movie American Me with actor James Olmos playing Cheyenne as the character Santana. White convict Joe Morgan, JD, power grew within the Mexican mafia, but he and other MA did not have Cadena killed. It was done by the Nuestra Familia. In the mid-1970s, the NF started to use younger norteños to do their bidding. And by the late 70s to early 80s, the Sureños were doing a lot of the work for the MA, as more and more prison gang members were locked down in segregation units. By the 1980s, the Nuestra Familia recruited almost exclusively from Northern California, as well as the MA recruiting almost explicitly from down south. These historical events and bloodshed during this gang civil war between North and South are some of the main reasons that many young Mexican Chicano kids fight today. They fight each other on the street and in prison, and sadly, many really don't even know why. Again, the NFM did not start at Folsom Prison. It started at Soledad and San Quentin in the mid-1960s, shortly after the start of the Vietnam War. Years later, Robert Babo Sosa was elected Nuestro General in the early 1970s, but he was not the original founder of the Nuestra Familia Mexicana, Familia Cinco, or Blooming Flower. Sosa's followers revamped the structure of the organization, revised the NF Constitution, and created the 14 Rules of the Warrior. One of the main reasons the word Mexicano was dropped in the NFM was because Sosa was Puerto Rican, not Mexican. Also, there were whites who were allowed to join the NF as long as they had no ties to the AB. There was a RICO trial against Sosa and his captains, including Death Row Joe Gonzalez, and he was impeached. Later, his successors under Black Bob Vasquez and Brown Bob Viramontes reformatted the NF again and wrote the 14 bonds at Folsom Prison and created the Nuestra Raza. While the Fresno regiment of the NF was big and the NF tried to control and tax drug dealers there during the 1970s, Fresno was not the first nor the largest. By the early 1980s, much of the F-14 had already jumped off as the Fresno Bulldogs, which is why NF calls them bullfrogs. Several RICO trials since have not caused the fall of the Nuestra Familia. One must be careful. There has been a lot of misinformation about these groups, sometimes even the info put out by the gangsters themselves, and sometimes they just do not know the true history of the origins. In March of 1997, a Nuestra Raza member was killed execution style near Castroville. His hands arranged to show a 1-4 so everybody would know that it was serious business.
That's real, man.
Yeah. The orders were believed to come down from the pen because he refused orders to kill his brother, who was an NR dropout. He also refused to do a hit on a gang worker in Salinas who was criticizing the NF Norteño movement. They are pulling bigger and bigger jobs, such as when an NF captain from Lodi, California, indicted on a RICO statute, was schooling the younger Norteño guys how to do cowboy operation robberies and function. NF and Norteños are big into drug dealing and have their own NF banks and communication systems, even in the state's most secure prisons. The NF has been the subject of several RICO trials, but is not fallen off the map. As it has so many times before, it is reformatted and spread into other states. It remains a security threat group. There have been many defectors or dropouts in the NF over the years, from the rank of general down to soldier. In 2001, another RICO indictment was handed down against 21 members of the NF after Operation Black Widow. All eventually pled guilty, and the leaders were incarcerated in the federal ADX at Florence, Colorado. The catalyst for the case were several previously unconnected homicides in the Sonoma County, Northern California area after the NF ordered execution of longtime NF Captain Maquillo Castillo, who was not taking care of business, and the murder of former NF General Brown Bob Viramontes. In July of 2008, self-professed NF Captain Robert Weddle Grattan, who wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Nuestra Familia, was killed in a car accident. The NF has been active outside of Northern California for decades longer than most people realize, but just keeps a low profile and often local law enforcement is not educated about their presence. A little quote that the NF used to use is, if I lead, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If they kill me, avenge me. If I'm a traitor, kill me. You know, that's a general summary, man, of a real quick breakdown of really actually
It's
good
very
actual stuff, man.
it's very concise, and it's very what you say. If you want to just get an idea of the NF in a nutshell, this article explains just for the common person who has no information, no knowledge, man. I think it's interesting though, man. Like some of the founding leaders were all from down south, like we discussed, man. They even mentioned Black Jess, man. I think Black Jess was the first one. I think in 1975, they killed him for trying to form a truce between the NF and MA, if I'm not mistaken. You remember that, right?
Yes, sir.
He speaks about, the time frame of when the North Daniels first started establishing those lines. That's a hard time period to really identify. It was sometime after the validation clampdown that occurred in 1976, when there was all kinds of killings and all kinds of stabbings.
Little technical difficulty, you guys. He's going to start right where he left off.
Yeah, so after the years and years, man, the whole part of when the first North Daniels were established, there's hard to pinpoint an exact year. Like I said, the 1976 clampdown, they took off all the NF and MA off these yards. For a minute, they gave them their own yards, and they were able. This is why many of these organizations, which had sleepers at the time, they had undercovers on both sides. You know what I'm saying? As far as for them to maintain on these yards, because they used to take them off and literally put them in the same prison, but they would house them on different tiers. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
San Quentin, that was a common place, as well as you also had, like, Tracy was always known as an NF stronghold. Chino was also known as an NF stronghold. And I think Soledad was kind of 50-50. I know they put some NF members on that yard in the 80s, but at that time, there may have not been any Sureños, but there was on that, not MA members, they had a lot of Sureños. So those were some strong established facilities, as well as Vacaville for a time period. And then the MA had, their strongholds like the Tehachapi, Folsom, and a whole line of other prisons that were down south, older prisons like that, man. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint when the first North Daniels were established, man. Within our history, what was told to us was, this is what was told within the NF history, is that the creation of the Sureños was established by the MA. I've always been taught that they played the smartest move that they could play, because their stronghold presence was always in Los Angeles County. So what they did was they started to establish a lie that the NF were North Daniels and that their targets were Southern Hispanics. And so they started to unify what they had as the local gang members as Sureños, and they aligned to that Trece, which was a representation of the MA. Therefore, what you started to have on these yards were a lot of Sureños that were doing the MA bidding. Now, at that time, they took off the NF off the lines too, as well. And so you had a bunch of northern people from up north who started to get victimized just because they were from Northern California. You know what I'm saying? Because these Sureños were doing the MA's biddings, and therefore they were being taught that the North Daniels were supposed to be NF.
Right.
And this is around the time in the 80s, which is states in our history, which is when they first started to create the bonds and formats, which was around the early 80s. Before they ever put any implementation about the Nuestra Raza and the birth date, these bonds and formats were written years before. You know what I'm saying? And they were schooling young North Daniels behind the walls. You know what I'm saying? Like Dancing Bear, Skip, and all them. They were the ones that came out to these lines and were pushing the North Daniel bonds out there on these main lines at that time. You know what I mean? There's different theories I've heard from different individuals. Some say that I've always been told that Skip was a North Daniel when he came from YA, but that he was, as soon as he came into the prison system, that they had already started to recruit him, and they recruited him as an undercover and put him out there as basically an attraction to push the North Daniel bonds and formats out there on those main lines. So there's always been different theories. You know what I mean? I've always been told he's one of the forefront founders of the North Daniel Collective when he came out of the hole in Tracy, and that's where he got his education and schooling. Okay, so from there, the Nuestra Raza birthday, like we've already discussed, January 22nd, 1984. That's just a date that they decided to give years later. You know what I mean? When the individual was killed, Paulo, Grisby from Sacramento when he was killed January 22nd, 1989. So years later, when they made these adjustments as far as the 497 salutations, they decided to give that an honorary date for every Norteño to recognize the Norteño movement. The Norteño,
and just to be clear, excuse me, just to be clear, he was killed by a gunner in the tower.
Yes, he was.
The state actually shot him and killed him.
So yeah, so every year we used to refuse CDC food that day and stuff like that. I mean, there were certain things that we used to do to pay homage to the sacrifices, man. But so the first Norteños that were on the yard, they were not really identifying North or South really at the time, but that started just to take fold on its own. It was created by these groups, the NF and MA, as a recruiting tool. And I've talked to old school NF member before, Bumpers from Santa Barbara, that years before, Babo was trying to establish something called Raza Primera or something like that, or some type of sub-faction. Hopefully he taps in and he sees this, right? Or Raza Unida. Raza, that may have been it. Raza Unida. He was trying to establish that because he wanted to curtail the effects of the MA recruiting people from down south. They wanted to still be able to recruit a self-faction farm team with having members from down south as well. Well, we see now that happened, you know what I mean? Eventually the MA took control of all down south, and eventually the NF took care of everybody from up north. But all historical components of the NF history, man, it all its origins, man. You even had Chino Sinners was still under the NF in the 80s. You know what I mean? Other hoods from down south were also under NF control, believe it or not. And I've talked to old school NF members about that, man. So, like I said, I think Black Bob was probably one of the most influential NF members ever, if you ask me, because he brought in that system, the OGB system and the CAT system, and no longer having one supreme general, and created that change. And the thing is he left the organization shortly after that. He could have named himself the supreme general. So it just goes to show what his intentions were. And as far as I've been told through numerous resources, he never debriefed. He just decided, I took care of business, I got this established, I'm walking away. And he did it just like that. There's a lot of things, man, when you read this article, man, that we could sit there and clarify and confirm. There's a lot of things that we can sit there and add onto it, though, man. Like the Fresno situation, when it comes down to Crackers and Chicken Legs and all these other individuals, and Sammy Venegas, and Crackers was expected to do a hit, him refusing to do the hit because the homeboy was from Fresno. And I think that was either Sammy Loco or Flacco, one of those cats, man, that they were supposed to hit. And he refused to do it, man, as well as misappropriation of funds from the regiment. Now, I've always been told Fresno was the first established regiment, right? Around 1975, but they were already experimenting with regiments in San Jose and Salinas years prior. You know what I mean? So when you look at the history of the Fresno regiments and the Bakersfield regiments, those were very influential by a couple people, you know what I'm saying? With Crackers being one of them.
Yeah, see, I had heard when I was in Pelican Bay in the 90s, man, the closest guesstimate that I got, and this is from two different generals, was the theory, the concept of being a Norteño developed as early or late 1977 to early 78. That's how far they started, realizing that certain geographical areas were hotbeds for one group or the other, and that there was a way to capitalize on membership and control by furthering those kind of, looking at it from that point of view, from that spectrum. And, what I had got was very late 77 or early 78 when the theory of being a Norteño or a Sureño started to evolve. As far as it being official, hey, we're Norteños, nobody's ever been able to exactly pinpoint that time, but it was a work in progress for a couple of years before it took a nice solid foothold. You know what I mean?
It was in Tracy, from my understanding, is where they started to establish that line. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that part.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They started to progress other people, man. So that's one thing, like, we can't, the historical components, like I said, history's always been distorted throughout the years, and we only know what's been filtered to us. But we've been fortunate to talk to several people who were there in the 70s You know what I'm saying? And so they've given certain enlightenment, man. But you know, it just goes to show, man, that the longevity of this organization, man, is that they're always thinking 2 steps ahead of how they can combat any type of attacks from administration or even their opposition and foes.
Yeah.
Both organizations still exist. You know what I mean? And for a while, man, it almost seemed like the AB was going to be extinct. You know what I'm saying? They've resurfaced, you know what I mean? So this article, man, by Gabe Morales, man, I mean, I can really corroborate a lot of this information. There's, you know, he speaks about there's been generals to everyone that have flipped. The only general to the 2 highest ranking members to ever flip on the organization would be Chente Rojo from Chino Sinners. He flipped around 1990, what was it, 95 or 96?
I want to say 95, but I'm not 100. Probably 95 though.
Yeah, and he was an OGB city member, man. And as well as let me see, Death Row Joe, of course. But even this is what people don't realize. Even up till 1995, you had city members, I believe, that were both from down south. Pinky from Rancho Cucamonga and Chente from Chino Sinners. So this theory that the NF has clearly been ran by people from up north, and people don't realize some of these like Chiquez and you know what I mean, Santa Barbara, even San Diego, man. There's been a lot of individuals, man. And if you just go to and listen to the names he mentioned, some of them are from Clanton, Little Valley, Maravilla. You know what I'm saying? So even Southern hoods from down south have a long, extensive history with the NF.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt, man. Yeah, like a lot of people don't even really necessarily realize that the MA, they're not Sureños. The NF, they're not Norteños. They're totally separate individual groups. Their predominant membership almost is exclusively from certain areas, but geography never has mattered, bro, to either group, and it still wouldn't to this day. If there was somebody worthy that say, especially going into the feds, you know what I mean? If going into a federal system, you know, some young Sureño comes in from San Diego, them guys will try to school him if they seem like if he seems like he's cool. I promise you.
Check this out. I've heard that they've recruited NF members in Nevada, Washington, Colorado, even Missouri already. They've actually recruited NF members already in the feds.
Bro, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, and that's just to name a few.
You know, because I think they have, what, 16 yards now, I think it is.
Yep. And
what I mean by 16 yards, I'm talking about a large group of individuals, and they're mixed with all these other groups. And what they're doing is they're networking their resources, man, and they're establishing gente that they find worthy.
Yeah.
The same way that we used to, you know, do character analysis to recruit potential street recruits, whether they were NUESTRA or even Norteños. You remember that. You do a character analysis. You evaluate manpower. You think of recruiting them for the streets. Could they be resourceful? Could they be utilized? They're taking those same type of schooling techniques and they're applying it in the feds.
Yeah.
And they're out there straight on these main lines, being able to see the do's and don'ts and the capabilities and seeing which individuals can bring the most to the organization, which is the ultimate goal, is the building up of the organization.
Yeah, that just goes to further show that, you know, a particular geography, Northern California, Southern California. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's home base for both groups, but it has no, it's not a foregone rule. It's not a foregone conclusion that that's where you have to be from and that's where you have to operate. They're going to expand, you know, everybody's looking to make more money. Yeah. You know, you got a good restaurant. Are you going to try to franchise that thing or are you just going to be happy with one? I mean, it's same thing, bro. You're going to grow and expand.
You know, it's interesting, man, to hear that Chalo, you know, who was one of the second in command at that time of the NF, and eventually I think he took over for a minute, or, you know, I mean, you get different theories on that, man, that him and Cheyenne were actually related. Cheyenne was actually on his way to taking out his own cousin at one time out there in the streets, man. Believe it or not. I think that happened around 1970 or 1971. Chalo went through a lot of stuff, man. The Memorial Day weekend, where I think DC got shot, one NF member, and then one citizen who was out on military leave, who had nothing to do with it, was killed in a shootout. They had two separate shootouts that weekend.
Yeah.
Memorial Weekend of '78, DC was there. I want to say Crackers, Sammy Dominguez, all these NF members, right, that we've heard about, man, over the years. They went out there to Bakersfield to take Chalo out. And I believe Chalo never, ever debriefed, you know what I'm saying? But he fell out of favor within the organization. A lot of it, they say, is because when, what's his name, Bobo became the general, he always held issues against Chalo because Chalo did not want to recruit him into the organization. Chalo had those revolutionary ideas where the movement started.
Right.
He thought Bobo turned the organization more into a crime syndicate. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that this goes to show, man. Don't forget Santa Barbara, and where Death Row Joe was from, Chiquez. They're close. They're not that far away from each other.
Yeah.
So them two must have had some type of secret relationship going on when they created all this stuff. Now, who knows? You know what I'm saying? The theory that Bobo did not know what Death Row Joe was doing, I find that hard to believe with the magnitude of somewhat intelligence that he had. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
But
I get you.
I did hear this when Death Row Joe was going through the indictments, right? Before he flipped, he was asking for donations to help him out in his case, in his cause. So they were plugging in all the money, all these brothers on the streets that were doing all this, they were doing more sacrifices to generate more money. And they created a kitty for him that he ran off with, believe it or not. On top of the NF Bank disappearing, which throughout the history, they've blamed Bobo for that. You know what I'm saying? Which I don't know. I hear different theories. You know, I've talked to some people that are old school NF members say that, you know, it was more Death Row Joe's actions, but you can't really confirm that it wasn't. I have a hard time feeling that you can't have two individuals of that much power not watching each other's back. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed.
You know? But I mean, we weren't there, man. This is just a perspective, man. I mean, everything else, man, we can analyze facts and go into, man. Just like we can go into like the theory of there was never any you know, certain members of the other group being killed, which we know that's falsified. You know, I can name about 3 or 4 people that were killed from the other side, man. But that's neither here nor there. We don't want to go into that debate.
Yeah, and the reason we throw out these theories, it's not because, you know, we're necessarily making these theories. These are things that have been presented from people who were around back then. And we put them out there because we have OGs that watch us, you know, that were around at this time. And maybe one of them might come through and be like, hey, you know, I know firsthand that this is exactly what happened because, you know, theories are one thing, but I like facts. You know what I mean? I like to know. And, you know, if somebody could put a different spin on than what we've heard, somebody who was actually involved, because they're out here watching us right now, man, do feel free to get a hold of us and let us know what's going on, you know, because,
you know,
you're a historical buff, so I know you'd be chomping at the bit.
Man, I'd be chopping up. That's like with the Cheyenne, when Cheyenne got taken out, man, the one thing that was interesting I found is one of the pieces used to take out Cheyenne, right? It came from they got that piece from an HA that worked in the center complex or something like that.
Yeah.
That gave it to him. You know what I'm saying? And it had nothing to do with the HA having any issues with the inmate or nothing like that. It was just this individual as a just regular inmate associated with NF members at that time. You got to remember, there was a lot of killings right there. Before that Cheyenne got taken out, man, you had the Reyes brothers got hit, a couple, you know, out there in Susanville, I think it was Diamond got killed, or Diamond got killed in Tehachapi. I get mixed up all the names on the history things, but there was a lot of killings going on at that time, man. So, you know, at that time they were going through somewhat trying to have a peace treaty, but other members were pushing a whole different line. You know what I'm saying? And so what do you think is going to happen with that? Every NF member that I've talked to says the same thing, that Cheyenne should have never got killed. It was other people in that organization that did not want to have the peace. You know what I'm saying? Even one that's on the other channel that we listened to, man, he stated that he didn't want no peace. He was out there in the yard trying to instigate things, calling them a bunch of lame farmers to their face, trying to kick off the war at the time, man.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, who would have known that all these events that happened over 50 years ago, man, that, you know, that for years there was harboring so much animosity, war. Like I said before, I think the inmate quit worried about the NF in 1980. As soon as they were separated and they were on different tiers and they were in the shoes and they were really not around each other, I know they started to integrate later on in corporate and they went out there and handled their business. But I think from the street part, organizational part, I think years ago, the MA and NF have really never tripped off each other. I think it's just all been in theory, something that's been indoctrinated in us to have that opposition, to have that enemy, because every cause, every movement, and that's what you have to sell. You have to sell an opposition. So I'm wondering how these organizations, what are they selling now today? Money.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, they cut through the chase, man. That's just not what it is, man. But hey, check this out, Flacco. So as you know, I went to the doctor yesterday. So that means we could talk about this boxer thing, man. But we've already been on here for a while, man. So what I'm gonna do, I say we do it live tonight, and I'll let everybody know whether I accept this challenge, if you want to call it a challenge, or if I would decline it. What do you think? You want to go live later?
We can do that. We'll go live later.
Sounds good. So all right, you two, man. I figured this would only be about 15 minutes, and I was gonna talk about it, man. But we got to get this uploaded for you guys. Tune in tonight, 7, 8 o'clock. I'll put out a post, and we'll talk about this fight.
Or the fight that's not going to happen.
Or it might not happen. You never know. We'll find out later. Stay tuned. Much love. Appreciate you guys. Holler at you.
I hope you enjoyed this video.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much, though. I appreciate that.
Once again, shout out to Gabe Morales, Cops, Gangs, and Politicians YouTube channel, man. Check him out and order his books, man. A lot of good information if you're interested in the historical point.
Yeah, his stuff, his information is on point, 100%. All right, you two. We'll holler at you later.